All right, we have a quick half hour together, so I'm going to get us started. My name is Brooke Gill. I'm from the Pritchard Committee, and I do our family engagement practice and policy. The biggest thing for us in this last year through the Kentucky Collaborative has been our Family Friendly Schools initiative. So excited to just talk a little bit about that today and kind of talking more about what we know in terms of teacher retention and satisfaction, and specific ideas for you as principals on how you can start developing that culture of family engagement at your school. I'm going to fly through some cool data and then ideas, and then hand it over to Gill, who's a principal at Kenwood Elementary in Jefferson County. And then next, Dr. Kathy Burkhart is going to speak to us about what she's seeing in Dayton Independent, and then also pulling on her previous experience as superintendent and principal. So let's get started. So what does the research say? When families and staff work together to support learning, teachers have higher job satisfaction, more likely to stay in their job and feel more supported by their community. 2, working conditions account for most of the difference in teacher retention rates. 1 being teachers' relationships with families, and 2 being teachers' perception of students' behaviors. Teachers are more likely to stay in schools where they feel they have an influence over school decisions, have support of principals and cooperative colleagues, and families that respect and trust them. I feel like many of these things were kind of touched on this morning in the keynote as well. Some interesting facts that came out in surveying in 2020 and then in 2021. So this data was released in July, so it's pretty new. And this is educators agree. Their top statement is that it'll be essential for families and teachers to trust each other in order to overcome the pandemic's impact on learning. While parents are confident that they understand how their kid's doing in school, teachers don't share that sentiment. And this has been really important in our work of developing tools for teachers and principals, is first starting with there's a disconnect of how well families think their children are doing academically and on par with their peers, and how well they're actually doing. And that can create your first hurdle of connection between teachers and families. And one big reason is we're looking at 2 different sources of information. So parents rely heavily on that report card. And I know even with my own kids, I have a 1st and 5th grader, if the report card comes home all A's, and then the MAP score comes back showing other, data points, that is really confusing to families to try to understand what I thought they were on point, they got all A's. So parents relying heavily on that report card to keep them informed, and teachers rank it 6th on the list of how families should understand how well their kids doing and what teachers use as their own diagnosis for academic achievement. With all of this information and need for family and school partnership, we need to look at how are our teachers learning about family engagement. And if you'll put in the chat box, this is always something we do, and it always has the same answer. If you'll stick in the chat box the number of hours you received in your pre-service education specific to family partnership. So how many hours were dedicated to family engagement best practices in your own pre-service training? Just stick it in the chat box. Robin says 0, maybe 1 hour of one class, says Jill. Very few. Usually, we actually did this at the KDE convening of the education recovery coaches, and there's about 140 folks in that room, and we asked for everybody to raise their hand if they received at least 3 hours dedicated, and nobody's hands went up. And we worked all our way down to 1 hour, and there was about 2 hands that went in the air. So our teachers aren't learning how to do this, and then they're expected to do it in the classroom on day 1. So they're just learning by looking at the other teachers. So it's a little bit blind leading the blind. So you have teachers who are natural at engaging families, and that's wonderful. But if you have teachers that don't pick up on that, then you've got a ripple effect of other teachers picking up on those practices. Similarly, we don't really have structures in place for family engagement. And so that's what we're trying to do with the Kentucky resources, the self-assessment, the certificate process, is that we don't really have formal structures in place for our teachers to be practicing intentional family engagement. Right now, what it looks like in Kentucky and really in most states is that it's random acts of kindness, and it depends on which teacher you get. So how engaged you are depends more on your teacher's personality than any kind of formal structure that's been put in place by the principal. And that's what we want to change. We want to see our schools have policies and structures so that families have an expectation and teachers do too. And this was reassuring. From the parents, teachers, and principals surveyed, everyone voted that being heard and valued is the number one most important area to build trust between families, teachers, and administrators. All right, so a couple strategies that work, and then you'll hear from Gill on what she's been doing in Jefferson County. This is a bit of a laundry list, but you'll have access to this PowerPoint, so hopefully you can grab it if something stuck out to you. My number one caution is that we do have Frisk in Kentucky, but they are not your only relationship builder in the school. And so we sometimes default to our Frisk because they're so amazing, but they can't have relationships with 500 families. And so just kind of being cautious of that family person being your Frisk. Whenever you convene families, be intentional. So if you're having your families in the school, we talk about the 4 C's being kind of your checkpoint. So when these families are in our schools, how are we building connections? Connections parent to parent, connections parent to teacher. How are we improving their capabilities to support their child's learning? So are they leaving with a new skill? Did we teach them anything? Cognition, was there an opportunity for families to leave with a new sense of who they are in their child's learning journey and what their role should be? And then confidence. Are families leaving with more confidence in, okay, I know how to help my kid get in college. I know how to help my child raise the reading score. Are we improving the connections, the capabilities, the cognition, and or the confidence? If we're not doing any of those 4, and we had 200 families pass through our building from 7 to 8 o'clock last night, we have to pause and think, was it a good use of our staff time to host that event? Was it a good use of family time to attend the event? What did they walk away with? As principals, give teachers small wins. So ask them to build relationships in really small and intentional ways. We hear that teachers sometimes get overwhelmed because it's like an all or nothing. If I can't engage all my families in my classroom, I don't have time to do all of it, then I just default to not doing anything. So a great example is just give teachers the assignment of call 3 families this week and tell them 3 things that you think is great about their kid, or send 3 notes home. And then at the next staff meeting, you just debrief what that experience was like. That is a small but huge impact of an ask of teachers and the use of their time. If it doesn't get checked, it doesn't get done. That was in our last presentation too, so absolutely. Teachers creating mini YouTube videos has been really popular. So as new units come out, you have your teachers create just 20-second videos about what they're going to be doing in the classroom instead of those newsletters. It's easier for the teachers, and families are more apt to watch a video than to read a newsletter. Improving communication does not mean adding more newsletters. So it means looking at what you're already communicating and making it more meaningful. Start with what you already have. You already have parent-teacher conferences. You already have back-to-school nights. You already have drop-off and pick-up for the elementary. If you're already doing muffins with mom, that's okay. Muffins with mom can be okay if we look at it through the lens of the 4 C's, and even sporting events. So where can you build in the 4 C's and or link it to learning is a great place to start. A few more. Don't call it Title I night. I've seen it like on, outside the school, it'll say Title I night tonight. What are you, come meet other families, come meet our teachers, learn about this. But let's get away from calling it Title I night. It sends a message to families, we have to do this, so we're doing it. Avoid the voids. This was touched on in our last one too. Sometimes we wait to have all the information before we communicate it with families. Tell them right away what we don't know yet. We know you're anxious for information. We don't have any information yet. So that families aren't sitting there feeling like you're not being transparent. It might just be that the decision hasn't been made or you haven't gotten there yet. Yoga example there for me was we had a parent that worked here, and her kids teacher was assigned by the principal to start thinking more about mental health and how they could build in mental health to their classes during COVID. And so they would start every day. This teacher decided to teach like a little mini yoga class to the students. Well, the parent overheard the mini yoga class and just assumed this teacher was slacking and not teaching and using this as an opportunity to get her yoga practice in. So it really made the parent mad. And then hearing later from the principal what the intention of that was, she was like, that's a great idea. I didn't realize that was the intention of the practice. And they got so many complaints that they actually ended up pulling it. So you think about that whole process of teachers being unique and different and taking time to think of things. And it would have been a simple email or communication to the families to say, hey, we're trying to play with some ideas on improving social and emotional wellness of our students. So you might see the teachers doing some odd things this week. Let us know what's landing well with your student. Wow, like that would have been the difference maker for her as a parent to have that information. Communication apps are wonderful. I actually love them. And it's a really great way to personalize messages without taking up a ton of teacher time. And most of them translate. So I think they're great, especially when they're used well. And there's a few more there. Last being our teacher resources, which you'll have a link to, and we're going to hear about more now. So I'll hand it over to Gill.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you. As Brooke mentioned, I'm Gill Handley. I am the proud principal of Kenwood Elementary in Jefferson County Schools. We were the first school in the state last year to certify as a family-friendly school. So excited to have that, working on becoming the first school to certify in gold level this year. So it's exciting. I'm actually doing a session at 2 that goes in a little bit more in depth. So I'll kind of give you the abridged version right now. Everything Brooke said is true. And so I think the biggest takeaways that I would have for me is going through the process was invaluable, because when you hear family friendly, you think, yeah, we're family friendly. And then you start to do the self-assessment, and then you become very humble. At least we did, with the things that we thought we were doing great. We were like, oh, we've got to step up our game a little bit. So really, for me, what we learned for our school is taking the team approach, making sure that we do have sustainable systems put in place, and utilizing the self-assessment from the Kentucky Collaborative to kind of guide our work, really around the idea of inclusion. Some of the things that we were finding is that we felt that we were doing a really good job, and we were, with a certain subset of our families. But what about the rest of our families? So between the self-assessment and then the digital playbook, which is a little bit like a huge rabbit hole that you can get into, looking through all of those elements and resources really helped guide our decision making. The other thing I will say is we took a step back. So if you've looked at the self-assessment, it's broken down to the 5 components. And so one of the things we pride ourselves on at Kenwood has to do with the relationship building. With that being said, we intentionally focused on upping our game with relationships last year, because we knew we couldn't get to the advocacy part if we didn't hype up our relationships. And so even though we felt that was our strongest, we did take a step back with that. Let's see here. Brooke, what else would you like me to talk about?
I think for this, I'm sticking a self-assessment link in our grid. just what you've seen change in your teaching culture, and just sometimes it's like an unintentional but wonderful kickback of improving family engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we recognize, I mean, we know that family engagement is important, right? But teachers, their plates are so full. And so it's like, how do we ask them to do one more thing? And so we were looking for ways that we as a family and community engagement team could do things kind of beyond the tier 1. And so we actually created an MTSS for families that we sort of, we see that that's good for academics with kids and behaviors. We know, everybody needs core instruction. So it's kind of like with our families, what are we giving all families? And then what things deeper with some of our families, and then what families need intensive support. And what we were noticing is that when we are able to do the heavy lifting, we being the team, and I say we, I would love to take all the credit, but it's the team. I just kind of help facilitate the work. And then we have a team that are roots to the ground with this. But what we notice is that when we're able to do that heavy lifting to remove those barriers that go beyond what a Frisky can do or has time to do with so many families, suddenly we start seeing improved attendance, we start seeing improved academics, we start seeing improved behavior. So really we know the need is there. It's just creating systems and structures that don't require the teachers to do one more thing. Not that they don't want to, it's just not sustainable to expect teachers to go down that deep route of that intensive support for families.
Absolutely. And I have the MTSS that Jill created, so I'll put that into the document too.
We're in the process of revising, by the way. So that was our first go.
Okay, great.
Yeah, still drop it in there, but we're just learning as we go, as with everything. So yes.
Awesome. Yeah, we really like that and shared it with KDE, and they're gonna maybe include it in their MTSS handbook.
Yeah,
so let me know when you update it.
Yeah, it's been a work in progress, but it's certainly been a game changer for us. Probably one of the biggest game changers is, and it's just a differentiated approach to family engagement. We know that one size doesn't fit all for kids, so why should it fit all for families? And so that was really kind of a game changing moment for us.
Awesome, thank you. Kathy, what do you want to build on? Kind of related to everything we've talked about and your experience in Northern Kentucky.
Well, I think you all shared everything. I agree with everything you said. You all did a wonderful job. So I don't know that I have much else to add. I could add a few things that just support what you all shared. As Brooke said, my previous role, I'm retired public school educator, 27 years of experience, and I was a school principal and a school superintendent for 11 years. And I also serve as an adjunct professor in the principal preparation program at NKU. So, and I also work as a nonprofit with Learning Grove. And we were a part of this grant with the State Family Engagement Centers, and we worked with many elementaries. And so, and many middle schools and high schools as well. But specifically wanted to share a strategy that Dayton Independent School District used, Lincoln Elementary. And so one thing that I found in my experience is exactly what you said. There's very little training for teachers, also very little training for principals, and very little training for superintendents on how to communicate and how to build relationships. Hopefully we know that in our personal lives, but when you get in the professional realm, it can be a little more challenging, or a lot more challenging, because we're putting, our most valuable resource, which is our children, our students, and when you put on your parent hat or a guardian hat, it starts to make more sense as we're communicating with families. So I found in my experience that no matter the number of years of experience, it's always an area we can all work on. And how to build relationships. We're asking teachers and principals to sit down and work with families and build trust. So we have to think about how are we doing that. So one way that that Dayton Independent worked on, and we had done some work with this in a small level in our school district before when I was in a school district, is looking at strengths-based conferences. So many times when the phone rings, or you get an email, or you get a something on a text, and it's from the school, what's our first thought? And you can put that in the chat if you'd like, but even if you're a school person or a school employee, you start to go to that parent hat and that what's wrong, right? So we want to change that dynamic. So really working with the strategies that Brooke described, and what I would always call making deposits, building that relationship, because there is going to come a time with almost every child when there has to be a conversation about something they need help with, something they didn't do as well as maybe the parent thought they should, or things like that. So it's really looking at how are you making those positive relationships. So strengths-based conferencing is one way to do that. So at Dayton, they really worked on using the Strengths Finder, which is from Gallup, but there's a free version out there of a strength finder called the VIA. We had used that one, VIA, and it really starts with finding student strengths. So they had, and with the younger children, you do strength spotting. So they worked in their school district. The teachers took the Strengths Finder and were able to know their strengths. And the school superintendent, Jay Brewer, actually spent a whole year going around in classrooms, and instead of doing observations, he would write, I see how you're using this strength. So there's some positive feedback there and getting to know one another. So when the parents came in for the conferences, and I put in the chat, I'll put the presentation that we.
Oh, you muted, Kathy.
Sorry, I put the presentation that we used. It's in the chat. That goes into more detail. So all the students knew their strengths, and the teachers shared theirs. Then they had parent conferences where families came in and they shared their students' strengths. So I know when we had done something like this, and even in this case, families and teachers were both in tears because they said no one had ever said that about their student, and it's about using these strengths to help work on those challenges. So if you think about it, we're always looking at things from a deficit model in schools. What do you need to work on? What is an area? What were your test scores? All of those things. So it's not saying that we don't work on those, but it's the lens that you use. So the PowerPoint has more information in there, but basically starting with strengths help to build foundational relationships that are still going on this year. Now they did that last year, and they're continuing it this year. Some survey data, 98% of the families found that the strengths-based conferences were beneficial. 100% felt it was very important to know their children's strengths. 80% reported that they learned something new about their child. And then 89% reported that they felt they left the conference felt more confident in reaching out to their child's teacher, because their first conversation was about how great their child is, how wonderful they are. And if we start there, it's a much easier conversation, and it's an authentic conversation. And so when a student has a challenge, then they can say, oh, do you remember? He's really, really good at organizing. So let's work on how we can use that skill to help with this deficit. So it's really pairing those strengths with the areas that children they need to work on. And we all have things we need to work on, but we all have areas of talent and strength as well. 100% of families participated, and they participated via home visit, in person at the school, or a virtual live meeting, or a phone conference. So the school allowed the families to choose, what are you most comfortable with? Some families are very apprehensive about letting anyone, into their home. And then some are very apprehensive about even going to the school. So giving families that option was an area that was really helpful. So, in addition to that, the teachers reported that they have a whole new, they were just so excited about how they had gotten to know the families and that they were more comfortable. So if you think about it, both comfort levels went up. So again, I put the PowerPoint in there for you to refer to, and I put the contact information for Dayton Independent Schools. The principal there is Heather Dragon. I'm happy to answer any questions too if you need any information later on. So thank you. I hope that was short enough, but also has enough information to help.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, I like these little 30-minute, it's all we can really handle anymore, I think, and I like it. So it's all the information you need packed in. Any questions? We've got about 5 minutes left of our session. Or challenges that you're having with family and community engagement, and we could kind of talk through that together. I'm going to go ahead and show you. Are you going to show the self-assessment during your session, Jill?
I was going to discuss the original one, yes, but I have a Padlet that has the original one and the new one linked in it as well. So
Okay. All right. Well, then I will show this screen of resources. Oh, okay, we'll go with Robin's question. Great. We struggle to motivate teachers to stay after school for an event. Yeah, that's real. I have a thought or two. Jill, Kathy, what about you guys? What do you think?
Well, I would say with Dayton Independent, if it's important, what they did is they went to their school board and they gave teachers time to do those conferences. So they actually blocked out extra time in their calendar. So it was paid time for teachers where they didn't have to come in extra. So if we say family engagement's important, as leaders, we need to make time for it. So it's not something extra. It does require some coordination and collaboration, but there's a lot of research around why it's important. And so we can share that if you need any of that data as well.
Jill, any thoughts on that? Do you run into that?
yeah. I mean, here's the thing. The truth of the matter is that everybody's still reeling from COVID, right? We're all still trying to get that stamina going back. And if your teachers are like my teachers, they have their own families as well. So sometimes it's not that they don't want to, it's just that they have their own family events to attend to. I think so for us, what's worked is just being really proactive with planning ahead of time so people can mark their schedules. And like Kathy said, accommodating them. Pay doesn't always go everywhere anymore, but I believe in honoring people's time. And so, I think gone are the days to where people could just volunteer and would volunteer for everything. That's not the world we live in anymore. So I think it's, looking if it's important, then budgeting funding to make sure that we can pay people for their time or flex their time in a way that just lets them know that you understand that I recognize it's a late night, but like Brooke says, and Kathy said, if it's important and to the school, helping them see the value, how their presence there is going to eventually show up as a benefit in their classroom.
I'll add to you. I think there are some events we've been doing forever that might be time to let go of. So I do see some schools, they've always done this fall festival or, and so sometimes it's being willing to say, is that really something families look forward to, teachers look forward to, or are we just doing it because we've always done it? And could there be a better use of time that would build stronger relationships and actually take less teacher time? So sometimes just kind of stepping back from those events and asking, why do we do this again? Jenny, did you have anything to add as in your coaching of schools?
I think the more that you can limit the number of times that you're asking teachers to stay after in a school year is helpful. And if you can make it clear at the very beginning of the year, okay, in October, we're going to have this, and in March, we're going to have this, and that's it. Then they can plan for it and be okay with it. The other thing is that sometimes grant partners in your schools have budget to offer stipends for teachers for family engagement. And that can be very helpful because it just shows them that you honor their time. And that can be a little bit of flexible funding.
Awesome, thank you.
I was going to do a plug for NCFL. I know we partner with NCFL, and so they do have grants for stipends for families and for staff members. So if you're not currently partnered with NCFL, check them out.